Tonight's story involves a dusty leather-bound book discovered in the archives of one of London's most exclusive gentlemen's clubs. Inside, love letters so passionate they'd make a romance novelist blush. The twist: they were written between two Victorian gentlemen who shared the same private room for 30 years. Think of it like finding your great-grandfather's secret diary, except instead of complaining about the weather, he's writing poetry about his dearest companion and how he aches for Tuesday evenings at the club. These weren't just friends meeting for a pint. These men built entire lives together in spaces specifically designed to keep women out, and men very, very close. Tonight, you are Charles Edmund Hartley, a wealthy London bachelor in 1875. You're 42 years old, never married, and if your mother asks one more time about grandchildren, you might actually scream. You live in a comfortable townhouse in Mayfair, but your real home, your actual sanctuary, is the Athenaeum Club on Pall Mall. And here's the part that would make modern people raise their eyebrows. You share a private room there with your dear friend, Thomas. You've been doing this for a decade. You have matching keys. The club staff knows to prepare your room every Tuesday and Friday evening. If someone from 2025 saw your arrangement, they'd probably say, "Congratulations on your relationship." But in Victorian London, this is just what gentlemen do. Completely normal. Nothing to see here. The historical evidence sits in climate-controlled archives across London. Membership ledgers from White's, the Garrick and the Athenaeum showing men who maintained private rooms for decades. Personal letters using language like "my beloved Thomas" and "I count the hours until Thursday." Legal documents, actual wills, where wealthy bachelors left their entire estates to their male companions instead of distant relatives. One particularly entertaining will from 1883 states, "To my dearest friend and constant companion of 28 years, without whom life would have been unendurable." His family was understandably quite cross about this. These documents exist. They're real. They're sitting in archives right now, waiting for historians brave enough to read between the very obvious lines. It's like finding a love letter that says, "You're my best friend," but also includes the phrase, "I cannot sleep for thinking of you." Sure, mate. Friends. This historical evidence shows us something amazing about Victorian male intimacy. As we settle in tonight, we're going to discover not just what historians found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of people who lived in Victorian London. But before we begin this journey together, write in the comments where you are listening from. It's fascinating to learn where in the world you are. Also, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Now dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about the phrase, "just good friends." Chapter 1. The most exclusive address in London. It's Tuesday evening, October 1875, and you're walking up the steps of the Athenaeum Club at 107 Pall Mall. The doorman, his name is Roberts, you've known him for 11 years, tips his hat and says, "Good evening, Mr. Hartley. Mr. Pemberton arrived 20 minutes ago." Your heart does a little skip. Thomas is early. He must have been as eager as you were to escape another deadly dull dinner party. The Athenaeum isn't just any club. It's the intellectual club. Founded in 1824, it's where scientists, writers and academics gather. Charles Darwin was a member. Charles Dickens was a member. The building itself is gorgeous, designed to look like a Greek temple, because Victorians really loved pretending they were ancient Romans having important thoughts. You pay an annual subscription of 12 guineas, which in modern money is roughly £1,500, not cheap. But for that price you get access to the library, the dining room, the smoking room, and most importantly the private rooms upstairs. Here's what modern people don't understand about Victorian gentlemen's clubs. They weren't just places to drink whiskey and read the Times. They were alternative homes. Many members spent more time at their clubs than in their actual houses. The clubs provided everything a Victorian gentleman needed: food, company, entertainment, and crucially, escape from domestic expectations. If you were a married man, the club was where you fled from your wife's tedious tea parties. If you were an unmarried man like yourself, the club was where you could avoid your mother's relentless matchmaking schemes. But the private rooms, oh, those were special. Most clubs offered them. For an extra fee, members could reserve small bedrooms upstairs. Officially, these were for members who lived far away and needed somewhere to stay after late meetings. In practice, they were whatever you needed them to be. Some men used them occasionally. Others, like you and Thomas, had essentially moved in. You had your own room, room 14, reserved permanently. The club staff knew it was yours. They kept your favourite brandy in the cupboard. They knew Thomas took his tea with too much sugar. You climbed the stairs, your hand trailing along the mahogany banister worn smooth by decades of members. The hallways are dimly lit with gas lamps. Electricity won't reach the Athenaeum for another decade. You pass the library, where old Professor Henderson is snoring into a copy of The Origin of Species. Classic Henderson. You pass the smoking room, where you can hear Lord Ashworth losing spectacularly at cards. You're not here for any of that tonight. Room 14 is at the end of the corridor. You knock twice, your signal, and push open the door. Thomas is sitting by the fire, still in his evening clothes, reading a letter. When he sees you, his whole face lights up. "There you are," he says, "like you're late, even though you're exactly on time. I thought you'd been kidnapped by your cousin Margaret and forced to discuss embroidery patterns. This is Thomas Pemberton. You've known him for 12 years. You met at a Royal Society lecture about fossilized fish. Riveting stuff, truly. He's 40 years old, never married, independently wealthy thanks to a shipping fortune he has absolutely no interest in managing. He has dark hair going silver at the temples, a truly unfortunate moustache that he refuses to trim properly, and a laugh that sounds like a startled duck. You find all of this unbearably charming. Margaret tried, you admit, settling into the chair across from him. I told her I had urgent business at the club. She looked disappointed. Mother looked suspicious. Father looked like he was trying to remember who I was. Thomas laughs his duck laugh. Urgent business. Yes, terribly urgent. We must discuss this article in Nature about... What's it about again? Haven't the foggiest, you say cheerfully. We'll make something up if anyone asks. Here's the thing about room 14, it's small. There's the fireplace, 2 armchairs, a small desk and 1 bed. Just 1. Not 2. 1 double bed with a heavy brocade coverlet. If you ask the club management about this, they'd say it's economical. Space is limited, perfectly normal for gentlemen to share. This was actually true. Victorian men regularly shared beds in hotels, boarding houses and clubs. It was considered practical, economical, no different than sharing a railway carriage. Except you and Thomas have your own houses. You don't need to share. You choose to. The evening unfolds in its familiar, comfortable way. You talk about everything and nothing. Thomas tells you about his sister's disastrous dinner party, where the soup was cold and the Earl of somewhere or other got drunk and insulted the fish course. You tell him about the new fossil acquisition at the British Museum. You argue about whether Disraeli is a genius or a disaster. You say disaster. Thomas says genius. You both know you'll have this exact argument again next week. Around 11, Thomas produces a bottle of port from the cupboard. I bought this for you, he says casually. The wine merchant said it was exceptional. I have no idea if that's true, but I thought of you. So here we are. It's such a small thing. He thought of you. He was walking past a wine shop and thought, Charles would like this, so he bought it. For you, to keep in your shared room at your club. If this were a man and a woman, everyone would call it courting. But because it's 2 men in Victorian England, it's just friendship, very close friendship. The kind where you share rooms and beds and write letters that say, my dearest, and buy each other presents, and plan your entire social calendar around each other. You pour the port. It is, in fact, exceptional. You sit by the fire, talking and laughing until well past midnight. Eventually Thomas yawns and says, shall we? Which is his way of saying, I'm exhausted. Can we go to bed now? You both change into your night shirts. There's a privacy screen in the corner, though after a decade you've both long stopped being particularly modest around each other. You climb into bed from opposite sides. The mattress is comfortable. The sheets are clean. The room is warm. Thomas is asleep in minutes. He always is. You lie awake a bit longer, listening to his breathing. watching the firelight flicker on the ceiling. In 2025, someone would call this a relationship. In 1875, it's called friendship. Perhaps the Victorians were simply better at friendship than we are. Or perhaps they were exactly as good at it as we suspect, but had more acceptable ways to hide in plain sight. Either way, you fall asleep in room 14 of the Athenaeum Club, next to your best friend in the world, and you are happier than you've ever been anywhere else. Chapter 2. The Language of Devotion. It's Wednesday morning and you're in your study at home trying to compose a letter. This should be simple. You write letters constantly, to solicitors, to your bank, to the Royal Society. But this letter is to Thomas, and somehow that makes it impossible. You've already crumpled up 3 attempts. The problem is this. You want to tell Thomas how much yesterday evening meant to you. You want to tell him that room 14 feels more like home than your actual home. You want to tell him that you count the days between Tuesdays the way other men count their money. But how do you say that without sounding like a character from a penny dreadful romance? The answer, you've discovered over the years, is that in Victorian England you just do. You say it. Because the language of romantic friendship, that's what they call it, romantic friendship, is perfectly acceptable between men. You pick up your pen again and write, "My dearest Thomas, I find myself already anticipating Friday with an eagerness that would embarrass me if I were a more sensible man. Our Tuesday evening restored my spirits in a way that nothing else could manage. You are, and have always been, the truest companion of my heart. The hours we do not share feel longer than they ought. Yours in constant friendship, Charles." You seal it and send it with your man. Thomas will receive it this afternoon. He'll probably laugh at your dramatic language and write back something equally ridiculous. He always does. Here's what historians discovered when they finally bothered to read Victorian men's letters. They're full of this stuff, absolutely bursting with declarations that sound undeniably romantic. Men writing to other men saying, "My beloved friend, I long for your presence. You are the sunshine of my existence." And nobody thought this was odd. It was normal, expected even. The term romantic friendship existed specifically to describe these intense same-sex bonds. It was different from regular friendship. Everyone understood that. Romantic friends were devoted to each other, sometimes for life. They wrote passionate letters. They travelled together. They sometimes lived together. They mourned each other's deaths with dramatic public grief. And Victorian society looked at all this and went, "Yes, lovely, very wholesome, excellent friendship, well done chaps." The key thing, and this is where it gets fascinating, is that these relationships existed in a world before homosexuality was really a concept. The word homosexual doesn't even appear in English until the 1890s. Before that, there's no vocabulary for it. There are men who commit gross indecency, illegal, but there's no identity attached to it. No sense of being a homosexual versus being a heterosexual. So what you and Thomas have? It's friendship. Very romantic friendship. Society has literally given you the language to express devotion to another man without anyone thinking it's sexual. It's brilliant. It's the perfect loophole. That afternoon, Thomas's reply arrives. You tear it open like a schoolboy. "Charles, you're an absolute sap, and I love you for it. Friday cannot come soon enough. I've told my sister I'm unavailable for her ghastly theatrical evening. She's threatening to drag me to see some improving play about moral virtue. I'd rather stick pins in my eyes. Shall we have dinner at the club first? The cook promised me pheasant. Ever yours, T. You read it 3 times. He loves you for it. He said love in a letter that you could theoretically show anyone. The thing is, you do show people. Not this letter specifically, but others like it. When your mother asks why you're not married, you show her Thomas's letters about what excellent companions you are. When your business partner asks why you're always at the club, you explain about your dear friend Thomas and your Tuesday and Friday evenings. Nobody finds this strange. If anything, they approve. Good for you, they say. Every man needs a close friend. Romantic friendships weren't secrets. They were celebrated, encouraged even. The Victorians genuinely believed that intense friendships between men were morally superior to romantic relationships with women. Friendships were intellectual, spiritual, pure. Romance with women was messy, sexual, complicated. Obviously, friendship was better. You can almost hear the Victorian logic. Why would you spend time with your wife when you could be having meaningful philosophical discussions with your dear male companion? Of course, there's a line. There's always a line. The relationships are only acceptable as long as they stay, at least publicly, within the bounds of friendship. As long as nothing obviously sexual happens, or at least as long as nobody talks about it, you're fine. It's the most British solution possible. Everyone knows, nobody mentions it, carry on. You spend the afternoon writing a paper about geological formations, but your mind keeps drifting back to Thomas's letter. I love you for it. He writes things like this all the time. So do you. You have a drawer full of his letters tied with string like you're the heroine of a Gothic novel. If someone found them after you died, they'd read like love letters. Because they are love letters. Except they're also not. Because they're friendship letters, which in Victorian England amounts to the same thing. It's confusing. Wonderfully, perfectly confusing. Friday arrives. You meet Thomas at the club for dinner. The pheasant is excellent. You talk about nothing important. Politics, gossip, whether Professor Henderson will ever wake up in the library, or if he's simply become part of the furniture. After dinner, you head upstairs to room 14. Thomas has brought a book he wants to read to you. It's poetry, Tennyson's In Memoriam, about Tennyson's grief over his dead friend Arthur Hallam. It's the most romantic thing Tennyson ever wrote. Everyone knows it's about Tennyson's deep love for Arthur. Queen Victoria herself said it was a beautiful expression of friendship. Friendship. That's the official line. Thomas reads aloud while you listen, the firelight casting shadows on his face. The poem is stunning, heartbreaking, utterly, undeniably romantic. When he finishes, Thomas closes the book and looks at you. That's rather what I'd feel, he says quietly. If anything happened to you. You don't have words for that. So you just reach over and squeeze his hand. He squeezes back. In room 14 of the Athenaeum Club, two Victorian gentlemen share a moment of perfect understanding. The kind that doesn't need labels or explanations. The kind that Victorian society has generously provided an entire vocabulary to describe without ever having to acknowledge what it really means. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Intimacy. It's 1878 now, and you've been a member of the Athenaeum for 14 years. You know this building better than you know your own house. You know which floorboards creak in the library, which chair in the smoking room has the broken spring, which waiter will sneak you an extra helping of pudding. But today, you're noticing something you've always known but never quite thought about. The Athenaeum, like every gentleman's club in London, is designed specifically to keep women out and men together. Think about it. The whole building is arranged to create layers of male-only space. The entrance hall, grand, impressive, intimidating to outsiders. The coffee room, where members read newspapers and judge each other's waistcoats. The dining room, exclusively male, obviously, because women dining in public would be scandalous. The library, the sacred heart of the club, where silence is enforced like a religious law. The smoking room, because women don't smoke, or at least they're not supposed to admit it. And upstairs, the private rooms. Each space gets progressively more intimate, more exclusive, more private. You're having this realization because Thomas has just been elected to White's, the oldest and most exclusive club in London. He's absurdly pleased about this. White's makes the Athenaeum look practically common. It's where royalty goes, where prime ministers plot, where the elite of the elite gather to gamble and gossip and pretend they're not gossiping. You should apply, Thomas says over dinner. You're at the Athenaeum, naturally. We could join White's together. I'm not posh enough for White's, you say. They take one look at me and realise my grandfather made his money in manufacturing. The horror. Your grandfather made his money in textile mills that employed half of Manchester. That's practically aristocratic. It's practically industrial, which is practically tradespeople, which is practically beneath White's notice. Thomas waves this away. They've accepted worse. Lord Pemberton got in and everyone knows he's an idiot. Lord Pemberton is a lord. That's sort of the point of White's. You're joking, but there's truth to it. The gentlemen's clubs of London exist in a strict hierarchy. At the top, whites and boodles, ancient, aristocratic, impossibly exclusive. Then Brooks's, slightly more liberal, relatively speaking. The Athenaeum for intellectuals, the Garrick for theatrical types, the Reform Club for political radicals. And by radicals, we mean people who think maybe Parliament could use some mild updates. Each club has its own character, its own membership, its own rules. But they all have one thing in common. They're spaces where men can be themselves. Away from wives, mothers, sisters, daughters. Away from the expectations of domestic life. Away from having to make polite conversation about the weather and pretend to care about floral arrangements. The Victorian home was the woman's domain. The club was the man's. Except here's the funny part. The clubs recreated domestic space. They had dining rooms, bedrooms, libraries, drawing rooms, all the rooms of a house, but without women. The clubs employed armies of male servants to do all the things wives and housekeepers did. Cooking, cleaning, organising, managing. The clubs were essentially homes run by men for men. It was domestic life without the domestic part. Or rather, with all the comfort and none of the obligations. Do you know what White's has? Thomas says, leaning forward conspiratorially. A betting book. Members write down bets about anything. Who'll win the election? Whether Lord So-and-so's baby will be a boy or a girl. Completely ridiculous wagers, all written down and saved for posterity. It's magnificent. The Athenaeum has a betting book, you point out. Nobody uses it because we're all too busy feeling intellectually superior. Exactly. That's why we need White's. For the gambling and the gossip. He's already decided you're both joining White's. This is typical Thomas. He gets enthusiastic about things and then refuses to let anyone rain on his parade. You'll probably end up joining White's just to make him happy. After dinner, you head upstairs. Room 14 is exactly as you left it Tuesday. Your books on the shelf, Thomas's ridiculous collection of terrible Gothic novels on the desk, the bed made with fresh linens. The Athenaeum staff maintains the room as if it's actually your residence, which, in a way, it is. You spend more nights here than at your townhouse. Thomas flops into his chair. He's gotten more casual with you over the years, and picks up one of his novels. The Mysteries of Udolpho, he announces. I'm going to read you the most melodramatic passages. Please don't. Oh, my dear father. Thomas reads in an absurdly dramatic voice. Could I but die, and be at rest with him? I hate you. No, no. I must continue to suffer. I'm leaving. I'm going to Professor Henderson's corner of the library. I'll become a fossilized scholar. Thomas is laughing so hard he can barely read. The very excess of my grief was a kind of luxury. You throw a cushion at him, he throws it back. You end up in an undignified wrestling match over the book, which results in you both on the floor, breathless and laughing like idiots. This is what the private rooms of gentlemen's clubs provided. Privacy. Real, actual privacy. In Victorian England, privacy was rare. If you lived with family, there were always servants around. If you lived alone, there were still servants. If you visited someone's home, there were chaperones. Even hotels weren't particularly private. Thin walls, shared facilities. But the clubs? The private rooms of the clubs? Those were truly private. Nobody questioned what happened behind closed doors. Nobody chaperoned, nobody supervised. The rooms were sacred spaces. Of course, officially nothing untoward was happening. You and Thomas were simply friends. Friends who shared a room, who wrote each other love letters, who spent every possible evening together, who literally crawled around on the floor wrestling over Gothic novels like overgrown schoolboys. Just friends. Thomas eventually pins you with the book on your chest. Surrender, he demands. Never. Surrender or I'll read the whole novel, all 600 pages. That's a war crime. Surrender. Fine! You win! You absolute menace! He grins triumphantly and helps you up. You're both completely disheveled. Your cravat is sideways. Thomas's hair is standing up like he's been electrocuted. You look at each other and start laughing again. Later, much later, you're both in bed, the fire burning low. Thomas is already half asleep, but you're still thinking about what he said at dinner. About White's. about the private rooms there. Thomas, you say quietly. Do you ever think this is strange? What we do? There's a long pause. Then Thomas says, voice still drowsy, no. Should I? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if other people, if they understand. Thomas rolls over to look at you. Charles, everyone has friends. We're friends. What's strange about that? He says it so simply, so confidently. And he's right. This is friendship. The Victorians have told you it's friendship. Society accepts it as friendship. So it's friendship.
Yeah.
Even if it's also the most important relationship of your life.
Yeah.
Even if you love him more than you've ever loved anyone. Even if the thought of losing him makes your chest physically hurt. It's friendship. You're right, you say. Go to sleep. Good night, Charles. Good night, Thomas. In room 14 of the Athenaeum Club, in the private space designed for male intimacy, 2 Victorian gentlemen fall asleep in the same bed, and nobody in the world thinks there's anything wrong with that. Chapter 4. The wills, the letters, the evidence. It's 1885 and you're 47 years old. Your solicitor has asked you to update your will. This is sensible. You have property, investments, various financial interests that need proper management after you're gone. The problem is deciding what to do with it all. Your father died 2 years ago, leaving you the townhouse and a comfortable income. Your mother is still alive, but has her own provisions. You have cousins, the dreaded Margaret and her brothers, but you're not particularly close to any of them. Margaret still hasn't forgiven you for missing her wedding because you were in Scotland with Thomas, looking at rocks. They were excellent rocks, no regrets. Your solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, no relation to Thomas, unfortunately, sits across from you with paperwork spread across his desk like accusations. The standard arrangement, Mr. Pemberton says, would be to divide your estate among your relations. Your mother receives a life interest in the income. Upon her death, the capital transfers to your cousins in equal shares. That sounds dreadful, you say honestly. It's traditional. Yes, well, tradition also says I should have married and produced heirs, but we're well past that, aren't we? Mr. Pemberton adjusts his spectacles. He's known you for 15 years and has given up being surprised by your unconventional attitudes. Do you have alternative arrangements in mind? You take a breath. I want everything to go to Thomas Pemberton. The solicitor's pen pauses mid-scratch. Your friend, Mr. Thomas Pemberton? My dearest friend and companion of 17 years, Mr. Thomas Pemberton. Yes. Not your relations? My relations can manage. Thomas is essential. Mr. Pemberton makes a note. I see. And if Mr. Thomas Pemberton predeceases you? The thought hits you like a physical blow. You genuinely haven't considered this. The idea of Thomas dying first is unthinkable. Then I suppose the cousins can have it, you say weakly. But Thomas goes first. In the will, I mean. He's primary beneficiary. Very well. Should I include a statement explaining this decision? It may prevent challenges from your relations. Yes. Write that. You pause, thinking. Write that Thomas Pemberton has been my truest companion, that he has enriched my life beyond measure, and that this bequest represents a small token of my gratitude and affection. Mr. Pemberton writes this down without reaction. He's done wills for gentlemen before. This isn't the first time he's seen one man leave everything to another. Here's the thing historians discovered. This was common. Shockingly common. Victorian wills are full of men leaving their estates to male companions or dear friends. Sometimes the language is restrained. My valued friend. Sometimes it's dramatically emotional. My beloved companion without whom life would be unendurable. The families usually weren't thrilled about this. Imagine being Margaret, expecting a nice inheritance, only to discover your bachelor cousin has left everything to his friend from the club. The lawsuits were spectacular, but the men kept doing it anyway. They kept writing wills that said essentially, this person mattered more to me than my entire family combined. You sign the will. Mr. Pemberton witnesses it. It's done. If you die tomorrow, Thomas will inherit your house, your money, your books, your terrible art collection, all of it. That evening you tell Thomas what you've done. You're at room 14, naturally, and you're slightly nervous about his reaction. Thomas stares at you. You left me everything? Yes. Your whole estate? Yes. Charles, I don't need your money. I have money. Ridiculous amounts of shipping money. I know, but I wanted it to be you. When I'm gone, I want you to have the things that mattered to me. And besides, the thought of Margaret getting my library was unbearable. Thomas laughs, but his eyes are suspiciously bright. You're the most sentimental man I've ever met, says the man who cried during In Memoriam. That was beautiful poetry. That doesn't count. You sobbed, actual sobbing. I was moved by Tennyson's mastery of language. You got snot on my shoulder. Well, now you're leaving me your entire estate, so I think we're even. You both laugh, and the moment passes, but something has shifted. You've made it official, in legal documents witnessed and filed, that Thomas is your primary relationship. Not family, not obligation, choice. 3 weeks later, Thomas invites you to dinner at his house. This is unusual. You almost always meet at the club. But he's insistent, so you go. His study is exactly like him. Cluttered with books, terrible novels stacked everywhere, a globe that's slightly wrong, Australia's too small, and papers scattered like he's been ransacked by thieves. I've done something, Thomas says without preamble, and you're not allowed to get emotional about it. That's a terrible start to any conversation. He hands you a document. It's his will. You scan it quickly. I, Thomas Edward Pemberton, being of sound mind, standard legal language, and then, do bequeath my entire estate to my dearest friend Charles Edmund Hartley, whose companionship has been the greatest joy and comfort of my life. You stop reading because your vision has gone blurry. Thomas. You're not allowed to be emotional. We agreed. We absolutely did not agree to that. I'm making the rule retroactively. It's my will. I can do what I want. You can't just... Your voice cracks. You can't just do this and expect me not to react. Why not? You did it first. I'm copying you. Turnabout is fair play. You put the will down carefully. We've both left everything to each other. Yes. That's rather significant. I suppose it is. If someone found these wills in 100 years, they'd think we were the best of friends, Thomas supplies helpfully. Brothers in all but blood, romantic friends, all of which are perfectly accurate. He's right, of course. That's exactly what historians would think. What they do think when they find wills like this. Oh, look, another Victorian bachelor leaving everything to his male companion. How touching. What excellent friendship. Except standing here in Thomas's study looking at legal documents that say, in formal legal language, you matter most. It's impossible to pretend this is just friendship. But it has to be friendship, because that's the word you have, that's the framework society has given you. You can love Thomas desperately, plan your whole life around him, sleep beside him 3 nights a week, leave him everything you own, and as long as you call it friendship, everyone nods and smiles and says, "How lovely." It's the most brilliant trick in the world, or the saddest, possibly both. Well, you say finally, I suppose we're stuck with each other now. Thomas grins. I suppose we are. That night, back in room 14, you lie awake thinking about wills and evidence and what historians might think. Somewhere in the future someone will find these documents. They'll find your letters. They'll read dearest and beloved and cannot live without you. And they'll call it friendship. Because what else can they call it? Chapter 5, The Underground and the Overground. It's August 1889, and all of London is buzzing with the most delicious scandal in years. A male brothel has been discovered on Cleveland Street. Telegraph boys, of all things, selling their services to wealthy men. There are rumours of aristocrats involved. Even Prince Albert Victor, the Queen's grandson, might be implicated. The newspapers are having an absolute field day, though they're being very careful about what they actually print. You're reading about it in the Times, while Thomas reads a more salacious account in the Illustrated Police News. You're both in room 14, naturally, on a Thursday evening that's turned unexpectedly interesting. It says here, Thomas reads, men of the highest social standing. He pauses dramatically. Were discovered in states of regrettable undress. That's almost impressively vague. Gross indecency, Thomas continues. Unspeakable acts. He looks up. Why is everything unspeakable? If it's so terrible, surely we should speak about it. How else will we know what to avoid? The Victorians don't do irony, Thomas. Shame. We could use more irony. The Cleveland Street scandal is making everyone nervous. Not just the men involved, but men like you and Thomas. Because suddenly there's a very public reminder that same-sex activities are illegal. Specifically, they're illegal under the 1885 Criminal Law Amendment Act, Section 11, which criminalized gross indecency between men. Before 1885, the law was unclear. There were old buggery laws, but they were rarely enforced and required proof of specific acts. The 1885 Act changed everything. Now, even attempting gross indecency was illegal, and nobody was quite sure what that meant. Holding hands? Sharing a bed? Passionate letters? Where was the line? The Cleveland Street scandal wasn't discovering something new. It was revealing what everyone already knew. There was an underground network of men who were attracted to men. It had always existed. But as long as it stayed underground, quiet, discreet, deniable, everyone could pretend it wasn't there. Now it was on the front page of the newspaper. Do you think, you say carefully, that people will start questioning other things? Other relationships? Thomas looks at you. Like ours? Yes. He's quiet for a moment. Then he says, no, because we're not like that. Aren't we? Charles? Thomas puts down his newspaper. What happens in brothels is commercial, criminal. What we have is friendship. Everyone understands the difference. Do they? Of course they do. Look at us. We're respectable men, members of distinguished clubs. We have families, reputations, positions in society. Nobody's going to look at us and think we're like those Cleveland Street men. He's probably right. Class matters enormously in Victorian England. The men caught at Cleveland Street were either working-class boys selling services or aristocrats slumming it. Both groups existed outside normal society, one too low, one too high. But middle-class and upper-middle-class men like you and Thomas. You fit perfectly into the respectable framework of romantic friendship. Still, the scandal makes you nervous. Over the next few weeks, more details emerge. Men fleeing to France to avoid prosecution. Trials where newspapers report everything in euphemisms so vague they're almost comic. Acts which cannot be named. Behavior shocking to public morals. Everyone knows what they're talking about, but nobody says it directly. Some men are convicted. Some escape. The whole thing is messy and sad and makes you grateful for Room 14, for the Athenaeum, for the respectable framework of club life that protects you. Then, in 1895, something worse happens. Oscar Wilde is arrested. Oscar Wilde, brilliant playwright, celebrated wit, member of fashionable society, is arrested for gross indecency. His relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas has become public. The Marquis of Queensberry, Douglas's father, has accused Wilde of being a posing sodomite. Sick. Wilde sues for libel. Queensberry wins by proving the accusation is true. Then Wilde is prosecuted. The trials are spectacular. Wilde's letters to Douglas are read in court. Passionate, romantic letters, not unlike yours to Thomas. "My own boy," Wilde wrote, "your sonnet is quite lovely." Hotel workers testify about Wilde and Douglas sharing rooms, about young male visitors, about behaviour that crosses from romantic friendship into something clearly sexual. Wilde is convicted. He's sentenced to 2 years hard labour. The whole thing is devastating, not just for Wilde, but for everyone like him, like you. Because suddenly, the language of romantic friendship feels dangerous. Those passionate letters? Potentially evidence. Sharing rooms? Suspicious? Intense male friendships? Subject to scrutiny. Victorian society, which had so generously provided the framework for men to love each other platonically, is now questioning whether that framework has been abused, whether romantic friendship was always a cover for something else. You and Thomas don't discuss it directly, but you both feel it. a chill that wasn't there before. One evening in room 14, months after Wilde's conviction, Thomas says, "We should be more careful." About what? Our letters, what we write. You feel something cold settle in your stomach. "Thomas, we've never done anything illegal." "I know, but people might wonder if they read our correspondence. They'd see friendship, that's all." "Would they? After Wilde?" You don't have an answer, because he's right. After Wilde, everything looks different. Letters that said, "My beloved friend," now look suspicious. Men who share rooms now seem questionable. The generous cultural framework that protected romantic friendships has developed cracks. "I'm not going to stop writing to you," you say firmly. "And I'm not giving up room 14. "Neither am I, I'm just saying, we should be careful." So you become careful. Your letters become slightly more restrained. Not cold, you could never be cold with Thomas, but less effusive. "Dear Thomas," instead of "Dearest Thomas." Your friend, instead of yours in constant devotion. It breaks your heart a little. The Victorian bargain had always been clear. You could love another man as much as you wanted, as long as you didn't make it sexual, and as long as you called it friendship. But the Wilde trials revealed that the bargain was shakier than anyone thought. That friendship could be reinterpreted. That devotion could be criminalized. The underground and the overground had always existed separately. The Cleveland Street boys and the Athenaeum gentlemen occupied different worlds, but Wilde had bridged both. He was respectable society and underground desires, and when he fell, the wall between the two worlds crumbled. After that, men like you had to be more careful, more coded, more afraid. The Victorian period of generous, open, passionate male friendship was ending, and men who loved each other would have to find new ways to hide. Chapter 6. The Legacy of Room 14. It's 1902, and Queen Victoria is dead. A whole era has ended. Edward VII is king now, and the world feels different. Electric lights are replacing gas lamps. Motor cars are appearing on London streets. The 20th century has arrived, and the Victorian age has passed into history. You're 69 years old. Thomas is 67. You've been friends, companions, partners, call it what you will, for 34 years. Room 14 is still yours. The Athenaeum hasn't changed much, though younger members occasionally look at you and Thomas with something that might be curiosity or might be suspicion. You're not sure which is worse. The world after Wilde is different. Men are more guarded with each other. The easy physical affection of the Victorian era, men walking arm in arm, holding hands, sharing beds, has become suspect. Suddenly everyone is worried about appearing too friendly, about seeming that way. The language has changed too. Homosexual is now a word everyone knows. It appeared in medical texts in the 1890s and has since spread into common usage. There's a growing sense that some men simply are homosexuals, that it's an identity, not just behaviours. This should be liberating, but somehow it makes everything worse, because now there's a category to be afraid of falling into. You and Thomas have survived by being grandfathered in. You're old men now, relics of the Victorian era. Nobody questions two elderly bachelors sharing club rooms. You're just two old friends who never married. A bit eccentric perhaps, but harmless. Sometimes you wonder what you would have done if you were young now, in 1902 instead of 1872. Would you still have found each other? Would you still have had the freedom to build this life together? Or would the new fear, the new scrutiny, have made it impossible? One evening, Thomas brings up something you've both been avoiding. "We should destroy the letters," he says. You're in room 14. It's Tuesday. You've spent literally thousands of Tuesday evenings here over the decades. The room is unchanged. Same fireplace, same chairs, same bed. You've grown old in this room. Why, you ask, though you know why. Because when we're gone, people will read them, and they'll either misunderstand or understand too well. Either way, it won't be what we want. What do we want? Thomas thinks about this. I want them to know we loved each other, but I don't want them to reduce it to something sordid or to deny it completely. I want them to understand that what we had was real and important, and also completely acceptable in its time. That's a lot to ask from letters. I know. You don't destroy the letters. You can't. They're too important. They're the evidence of a whole life lived together. But you understand Thomas's fear. Future historians will read your correspondence and try to fit it into their categories. Either you'll be just friends, wrong, or secretly gay, incomplete. The truth that you were Victorian men who loved each other within the framework your era provided will be lost. Because the thing is, you were products of your time. The Victorian age gave you romantic friendship as a framework, and you lived within it. You said beloved and dearest because those were acceptable words. You shared rooms because that was acceptable behaviour. You left each other everything in your wills because that was an acceptable expression of friendship. Were you also in love? Yes, obviously, of course you were. But you didn't have that language. You had friendship. And friendship was enough because you made it enough. The tragic thing is that your era ended. The generous Victorian allowance for male intimacy closed down after Wilde. The 20th century would be stricter, more suspicious, more afraid. Men loving men would have to go underground completely. The open expressions of devotion you'd enjoyed would become impossible. But you had your time. You had your Tuesdays and Fridays. You had room 14. You had 34 years of companionship that society accepted and celebrated. That was more than many people got. Thomas dies in 1907. Heart failure, the doctors say. Quick, relatively painless. One day he's there, the next day he's gone. You're at his bedside when it happens. His sister tried to have you removed. Family only. But Thomas's will specified that you're to have full access. Because you are family. Just not the kind the Victorians made easy space for. His last words are, "Don't let them have the letters." You promise. At the funeral, you stand in the back. His sister gets the front pew, the public grief, the sympathy. You get nothing, because officially, you were just his friend. Not his widow, not his partner, just his friend. But when the will is read, you inherit everything. The house, the money, the terrible Gothic novel collection, and the letters. Hundreds of letters spanning decades. You take them all back to room 14. It's yours now, just yours. Unbearably empty. You read through the letters over the following weeks, your whole relationship documented in ink. My dearest Thomas, yours always. I count the hours until Tuesday. You are the great joy of my existence. You could burn them, protect both your reputations. Let history think you were just conventional Victorian bachelors, but that would be erasing the truth. So instead, you do something cleverly Victorian. You donate everything to the Athenaeum's archives. All the letters, carefully labelled and preserved, with a note requesting they remain sealed for 50 years after your death. Let the future decide what to make of you. You die 3 years later, in 1910. Peacefully, in your sleep, at home. They find you with one of Thomas's letters on your bedside table. Your estate goes to the dreaded Margaret's son. He's less dreaded than his mother. He donates your library to the Athenaeum, including all your correspondence with Thomas. The letters sit in archives for decades. Eventually, historians find them. They puzzle over the passionate language. They debate whether you and Thomas were just friends, or more than friends. They write academic papers with titles like Romantic Friendship in the Victorian Era and Homosocial Bonds in Victorian Club Culture. They never quite agree on what you were, but here's what they do document. 2 men who loved each other, who built a life together within the constraints and freedoms of their era, who had 34 years of Tuesday and Friday evenings in room 14. 2 men who were lucky enough to live in a brief window of history when society gave them just enough space to be together, even if it could never quite name what they were to each other. 2 Victorian gentlemen whose story survives in their own words. You are, and have always been, the truest companion of my heart. That, at least, is indisputably true. As our journey through the secret history of Victorian gentlemen's clubs concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry, woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. Until our next archaeological adventure together, this is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Sweet dreams, fellow explorers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and may your rest be filled with wonder at the remarkable tapestry of human history. But for now, stay tuned, as we have a bonus story coming right up, read especially for you by our guest narrator.
Thank you for having here. What a wonderful channel. Our next story is the Victorian reality show, When Human Zoos Were Entertainment. Hope you like it. Let's talk about World's Fairs. You know the ones. Those grand, turn-of-the-century spectacles where everyone wore top hats and long dresses and marveled at the future. We picture them as these charming, sepia-toned showcases of progress. The first Ferris wheel, the debut of the telephone, maybe an exciting new flavor of ketchup. It's a clean, almost wholesome image of scientific marvels and cultural exchange, a kind of proto-Epcot Center where nations politely displayed their finest achievements. It's the history we get in textbooks, the version that makes us feel good about the march of industrialization and global connection. It's neat, it's tidy, and it's a comforting bedtime story about how far we've come. That story is a beautifully constructed lie. In reality, the most popular, most profitable, and most talked about exhibits at these grand fairs weren't the machines or the architectural wonders. They were people. Living, breathing human beings put on display in meticulously crafted, fake native villages, like zoo animals in a new state-of-the-art enclosure. This wasn't some niche, fringe spectacle. This was the headline act, the main event that drew millions of paying customers who gawked, pointed, and sometimes even threw food. The entire concept was built on a foundation of scientific racism so profound and so mainstream it was considered unquestionable fact. The idea of a quaint, polite World's Fair was a carefully curated fantasy. Tonight, you are one of the exhibits. The year is 1889, and you are standing on the damp, manicured grass of the Champ de Mars in Paris, with the brand new Eiffel Tower looming over you like a skeletal giant. You are from a small village in what European cartographers have recently started calling the French Congo. You are a skilled hunter, a father, and a respected elder in your community, known for your quiet wit and your knowledge of the forest. And here, in the heart of the civilized world, you are a professional savage. The proof of your strange new profession is in a postcard, one of thousands being printed and sold for a few centimes just outside the gates of your enclosure. It's a photograph of you and your family, posed uncomfortably in front of a thatched hut that looks nothing like your actual home. You're holding a spear you haven't used in months, your expression a carefully constructed mask of stoicism. On the back, in elegant cursive, it reads, Exposition Universelle, Paris 1889, Village Nègre. This little piece of cardstock is the artifact, the receipt. It's not a weapon or a tool. It's a piece of mass-produced media, a souvenir from a human zoo. It's the undeniable proof that your life has been turned into a commodity, your culture into a caricature, and your very existence into a form of entertainment. It's the piece of evidence that, over a century later, forces us to tear down the quaint fantasy of the past and confront the bizarre, unsettling reality. This discovery, made not in a single dig, but found in archives and attics across Europe, reveals something extraordinary about the age of empire and the birth of modern entertainment. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what historians found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable and deeply alien lives of people who lived through this strange chapter of history. Now dim the lights, and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about progress, science, and the stage we all perform on. Your journey to this place began not with a promise of adventure, but with a contract. Or at least, that's what the fast-talking white man with the sunburnt nose and the ill-fitting suit called it. He didn't speak your language, of course. He spoke through an interpreter, a man from a coastal tribe who had learned French from traders, and whose loyalty seemed to shift with the tide. The words were a cascade of shimmering possibilities. A voyage across the Great Water, a chance to see the legendary Iron Village of the French, and payment in francs, a currency you barely understood, but which the interpreter assured you was of immense value. You would be ambassadors of your culture, he said. You would show the people of Europe your dances, your crafts, your way of life. It would be an honor. You looked at your wife, your children, the faces of the dozen or so others from your village who had gathered to listen. There was a drought that year. The hunt was difficult. The crops were failing. The offer, as alien as it was, felt like a lifeline thrown from a ghost ship. You were a practical man. Honor was a fine thing, but food was better, so you agreed. You put your mark a thumbprint, as instructed on a piece of paper filled with swirling symbols you couldn't read. You didn't know it then, but you had just signed away the next year of your life to a man who saw you not as an ambassador, but as an asset. A walking, talking piece of prime ethnographic real estate. The voyage itself was a disorienting nightmare. You were herded onto a steamship, a monstrous metal beast that groaned and shuddered and belched black smoke. For weeks, you were confined to a cramped, foul-smelling hold below deck. The world became a monotonous cycle of swaying floors, the stench of coal and unwashed bodies, and the relentless churning sound of the engine. The sea, which you had only ever seen from the shore, was a terrifying, endless expanse of gray. Some of the elders grew sick, their spirits dimming with each passing day. You tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, telling stories to the children, leading quiet songs in the evening. But it was like trying to build a fire in the middle of a flood. The familiar rhythms of your life had been obliterated, replaced by the mechanical, indifferent rhythm of the ship's engine. When you finally arrived in Marseille, the sensory assault was overwhelming. The noise was the first thing that hit you, a cacophony of shouting, clanging bells, steam whistles, and the rumble of iron-wheeled carts on cobblestone. The air was thick with smells you couldn't identify, a mix of sea salt, fish, coal smoke, and something else, something cloyingly sweet and faintly rotten that seemed to cling to the city itself. And the people. So many people, all pale-faced and moving with a frantic, purposeful energy you found baffling. They stared at you, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. You and your group, clad in the remnants of your travel clothes, were an island of dark skin and bewildered silence in a sea of bustling, chattering white. It was your first taste of being an exhibit, even before you'd reached the exhibition. The train ride to Paris was another blur of alien landscapes. You saw fields greener than any you'd ever known, neatly divided by stone walls. You saw towns and cities, dense clusters of stone buildings that scraped the sky. It was all so crushingly permanent, so aggressively ordered. It made the forest, with its chaotic, untamable vitality, feel a world away. You felt a profound sense of dislocation, a feeling that would become your constant companion for the next year. You were unmoored, adrift in a world that operated by rules you couldn't begin to comprehend. And then you arrived in Paris. The city was a monument to its own power, a sprawling landscape of stone and iron. And at its heart was the Exposition Universelle, a temporary city built to celebrate the centenary of the French Revolution. It was a wonderland of grand palaces dedicated to industry, fine arts, and machinery. But you weren't taken to see any of that. You were led past the gleaming pavilions, past the elegantly dressed crowds, to a secluded corner of the fairgrounds. And there, You saw your new home. It was called the Village Neger. It was a collection of about a dozen mud and thatch huts, hastily constructed and arranged in a rough circle. A low fence, no more than waist-high, separated it from a wide gravel path. This was the stage. This was where you would perform the role of savage for the next 6 months. The huts were caricatures, clumsy approximations of your real homes built by French laborers from vague descriptions and fevered imaginations. The promoter, the man with the contract, handed you the costumes you were to wear. Scraps of animal hide and simple loincloths, things you might wear for a specific ceremony back home, but certainly not for daily life. He also gave you the props, spears, shields, and drums. Your life was being reduced to a handful of easily digestible symbols. The first day was the most jarring. As the fair opened, the crowds began to arrive. At first, it was a trickle, but by midday, it was a flood. They pressed against the low fence, a wall of pale, curious faces. They pointed. They murmured to each other in their fast, liquid language. They laughed. It was a deeply unsettling experience. You were used to being seen, of course, but not like this. This was not the mutual gaze of community. This was the one-sided, consuming gaze of the spectator. You felt like an interesting rock, a peculiar species of bird that had been discovered. You were an object of study, an item of curiosity. Your job, as outlined by the promoter through his smirking interpreter, was simple: be authentic. You were to carry on with your daily life. You were to cook over an open fire, pretend to sharpen your spears, and at scheduled times throughout the day, perform. The performances were the centerpiece of the attraction. You were instructed to dance, to chant, to stage mock battles. The crowd loved it. They would cheer and applaud as you leaped and shouted, their faces alight with a kind of thrilled condescension. They saw what they expected to see: wild, untamed primitives, living relics of a bygone age. They had no idea that the chants were often quiet prayers for home, or that the war dances were modified versions of harvest celebrations, their meanings twisted and hollowed out for this strange new context. You learned to compartmentalize. There was the you on display, the spear-wielding, chanting savage that the Parisians paid to see. And then there was the real you, the one that emerged after the gates closed each evening. In the relative privacy of your crude hut, you and your family would shed the performance. You would speak in your own language, share the meager food you are given, and try to piece together some semblance of your old life. You would talk about home, about the people you missed, about the taste of familiar food. You would worry about the elders, whose coughs were growing worse in the damp Parisian air. These moments were your sanctuary, a small, fiercely guarded space where you could remember who you were. But the performance was becoming a part of you, a second skin that was getting harder to shed. You started to see yourself through their eyes. You became intensely aware of your own body, your skin color, your movements. The constant scrutiny was a form of psychological erosion. It chipped away at your sense of self, replacing it with the reflection you saw in 1,000 staring eyes. You were a living stereotype, and the most frightening thing was that some days you almost believed it yourself. The scientists were a regular feature. These were men in severe black suits, with neat beards and an air of immense self-importance. They were anthropologists, ethnologists, the new priests of a religion called scientific racism. They would come into your enclosure with their measuring tapes and calipers. They would measure your skull, the length of your arms, the width of your nose. They would jot down their findings in little notebooks, nodding sagely to each other. They spoke about you as if you weren't there, using long, complicated words. You didn't understand what they were saying, but you understood the tone. It was the same tone a farmer uses when discussing his livestock. They were there to prove a theory. The theory was that humanity was arranged in a neat hierarchy, with the white European at the pinnacle of evolution and everyone else arranged on the rungs below. You, they had decided, were near the bottom. Your skull shape, your primitive customs, your dark skin, it was all evidence of your inferiority. You were a living link to prehistoric man, a creature of instinct rather than intellect. The entire exhibition was designed to reinforce this idea. Just a short walk from your savagey village was the Palace of Industry, a monument to European ingenuity. The contrast was the point. Look at us, it said, and look at them. This is what progress looks like. This is the natural order of the world. One of the men, a Dr. Verneau, was particularly interested in you. He would spend hours just watching you, his gaze intense and analytical. He had you pose for photographs, endless photographs. He would position you just so, holding a spear, scowling at the camera. He was creating a document, a piece of scientific proof, but it was a fiction. The scowl wasn't a sign of your savage nature. It was a sign that you were tired, hungry, and deeply, profoundly annoyed. The photograph, like the postcard, told a lie that was more powerful than the truth. It was a lie that would be printed in books, displayed in museums, and taught to schoolchildren for generations. You were becoming an unwilling icon of your own supposed inferiority. And yet, within this dehumanizing system, you found small ways to resist. They were not grand acts of rebellion. They were subtle, quiet assertions of your own humanity. Sometimes, during the performances, you would intentionally sing the songs slightly off-key or mix up the steps of the dance. It was a private joke, a small act of sabotage that went completely unnoticed by the audience but was deeply satisfying to you. Other times, when the anthropologists were measuring you, you would hold your breath or subtly flex your muscles, just to throw off their precious data. You found a perverse pleasure in imagining their frustration as they tried to make their numbers fit their theories. You also learned to negotiate. The promoter, for all his power, needed you. A sick or uncooperative exhibit was bad for business. You learned that by refusing to perform, you could bargain for better food, for warmer blankets, for medicine for the elders. It was a delicate, dangerous game. Push too hard, and you risked punishmentless food or even physical violence from the guards. But not pushing at all meant accepting your fate completely. So you learned to walk the line. You became a shrewd negotiator, a quiet diplomat in a world designed to render you silent. You were fighting not for freedom, it seemed an impossible dream, but for dignity. You were fighting for the right to be treated as a human being, not just a specimen. The strangest moments were the quiet ones, the interactions that broke through the wall of the spectacle. One rainy afternoon, when the crowds were thin, a young woman stood by the fence for a long time, just watching you. She wasn't pointing or laughing. She had a sketchbook and was drawing the patterns on one of the clay pots your wife had made. Eventually, she caught your eye. She smiled, a small, hesitant smile. You, surprised, nodded back. It was a fleeting moment of connection, a silent acknowledgement of a shared humanity that transcended the grotesque theater of the exhibition. It was a reminder that the crowd wasn't a monolith. It was made up of individuals, some of whom, perhaps, saw past the caricature to the person underneath. But these moments were rare. Most of the time, you were faced with the relentless, unthinking cruelty of the crowd. They would throw things into the enclosure: coins, bits of food, even cigar butts. It was as if the fence was a magical barrier that stripped you of your humanity. On the other side, they were people. On your side, you were ... something else. The children in the crowd were often the worst. Unfiltered by adult etiquette, they would mimic your chants in high, mocking voices or make ape-like gestures. You saw their parents chuckle, reinforcing the lesson. You were watching a generation being taught to see you as less than human, and you were the living teaching aid. One day, a new group of people was brought into an adjacent enclosure. They were from a place called Java. They were small, with light brown skin and elegant clothes. They performed graceful dances to the sound of strange, beautiful music. Your promoter was furious. They were competition. The crowds were suddenly fascinated by these new, exotic people. Attendance at your village dropped. To drum up business, your promoter demanded you make your performances wilder, more authentic. He wanted more shouting, more spear-waving, more bare chests. He was, in essence, an impresario, and your act was getting stale. This was perhaps the most surreal aspect of your new life. You were part of an entertainment industry, a bizarre circuit of human exhibitions that stretched across Europe and America. After Paris, you were told, you would be going to Brussels, then London, then perhaps even the New World. You were a touring act. The realization was profoundly disorienting. Back home, your life had a rhythm dictated by the seasons, by the needs of your community. It was a life of purpose and meaning. Here, your life was dictated by ticket sales and the fickle tastes of the public. You had gone from being a hunter to being a vaudeville performer, and you hadn't even auditioned. As the Paris exhibition wound down, a deep weariness settled over your group. 2 of the elders had died, their bodies quietly taken away in the night. The children were thin and listless. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull, aching homesickness. You dreamt of the forest, of the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. You yearned for the simple, profound comfort of being in a place where you belonged, where you were known. The move to Brussels was a repeat of the first journey, only this time you knew what to expect. The same cramped train car, the same staring crowds, the same hastily built village. But this time, something had shifted in you. The quiet acts of resistance grew bolder. You began to deliberately misunderstand the interpreter's instructions. You and the others would hold conversations in your own language, right in the middle of a performance, laughing at private jokes while the audience assumed it was all part of this savage ritual. You were carving out a mental space that they couldn't touch. You also became an astute observer of your captors. You studied their customs with the same intensity that they studied yours. You noted their strange social rituals, their bizarre clothing, the way they interacted with each other. You saw the loneliness in the eyes of the guards, the desperation in the face of the promoter when ticket sales were down. You started to see them not as a monolithic force of oppression, but as flawed, complicated individuals, trapped in their own kind of performance. The man who saw you as a savage was himself a prisoner of the very system he was perpetuating. It didn't make your situation any better, but it made it, somehow, more bearable. One of the running gags amongst your group became playing anthropologist. When you were alone in the evenings, you would mimic the severe, bearded scientists. You'd pick up a stick and use it as a caliper, measuring each other's heads and pretending to jot down notes. "Ah, yes," one of you would say in a mock-serious tone. A classic example of the Belgian promoter skull. Note the pronounced greed gland and the underdeveloped empathy lobe. It was a gallows humor, a way of coping with the absurdity of it all. By turning their methods back on them, you stripped them of their power. You turned their science into a joke, and in doing so, you reclaimed a piece of your own dignity. The archaeological record of your experience isn't found in the ground. It's not in pottery shards or the foundations of your fake hut. It's in the archives. It's in the business ledgers of the promoters, where you are listed as a line item, an expense, an asset. It's in the thousands of postcards and photographs, mass-produced images that solidified a racist caricature in the public imagination. It's in the breathless newspaper articles that described your primitive ways in lurid detail. And it's in the dry academic papers of the anthropologists, filled with their skull measurements and their confident, deeply flawed conclusions about the hierarchy of man. These documents are the artifacts that tell your story. They are the receipts of a transaction where human lives were the currency. When we look at them today, we see not just the story of your exploitation, but the story of how a whole society convinced itself that this was acceptable. This wasn't the work of a few evil men. It was a mainstream enterprise, sanctioned by governments, celebrated by the press, and funded by the ticket-buying public. It was a system, a vast, self-perpetuating machine for turning prejudice into profit. You never saw the contract again. You never received the vast payment you were promised. After a year of being shuttled from city to city, your promoter's business went bankrupt. One morning, he was simply gone. You and the remaining members of your group were abandoned in a foreign city with no money, no papers, and no way to get home. You were, for the first time in a year, technically free, but you were also completely lost. What happened next is a blur in the historical record. For many like you, the story simply ends there. They disappeared into the margins of European society, dying of disease or poverty, their names and stories lost forever. Some were helped by charitable organizations or church groups, eventually finding passage back home. But returning was its own kind of trauma. How do you explain where you've been? How do you reintegrate into a community after living through a nightmare they can't possibly comprehend? You would have returned a changed person, haunted by memories of the iron villages and the staring eyes. Let's imagine for a moment that you were one of the lucky ones, that a sympathetic official arranged for your passage home. You stand once again on the deck of a groaning steamship, but this time you are sailing toward the sun, not away from it. As the coastline of your homeland comes into view, a feeling you thought you had lost forever washes over you, the feeling of belonging. When you step off the boat, the air is different. It's thick and humid and alive with the smells of home. The sounds are familiar. The language is your own. You walk back to your village, a ghost returning from the land of the dead. The reunion is joyous, but also strained. You look at your friends and family, and you see them with new eyes. You see the richness and complexity of your culture, a culture that had been reduced to a crude pantomime for European entertainment. And they look at you, and they see someone who has been irrevocably changed by the world beyond the horizon. You try to tell them about what you saw. You try to describe the buildings that touch the clouds, the horseless carriages, the endless sea of white faces. They listen, but they don't understand. It sounds like a fever dream, a madman's tale. How can you explain the feeling of being an exhibit? How can you describe the cold, analytical gaze of the scientist, or the thoughtless cruelty of the crowd? The words fail you. Your experience is a chasm that separates you from the people you love. You are home, but you are also, in a way, still in exile. The most enduring legacy of your journey is not in your own memory, but in the memory of the world you left behind. The postcards with your face on them are still out there, tucked away in albums and archives. The scientific papers with your measurements are still sitting on library shelves. The ideas they helped to build ideas about racial hierarchy, about civilizational progress, about the white man's burden, did not die when the exhibitions closed. They seeped into the foundations of the 20th century, shaping colonial policies, immigration laws, and social attitudes in ways that are still with us today. You, the unwilling performer, became a silent co-author of a story that was used to justify conquest and oppression. Your image, stolen and distorted, became a tool of empire. This is the final, bitter irony of your ordeal. You were taken from your home to be put on display, and in a way, you have never been allowed to leave the stage. You remain frozen in time, a stereotype preserved in sepia tones, a testament to a time when people were turned into living museum pieces. When archaeologists of the future dig up the remains of the 1889 Exposition Universelle, they will find the foundations of the grand palaces. They will find the iron skeleton of the Eiffel Tower. They will find countless artifacts of industrial modernity. But they will find very little direct evidence of your village. The mud and thatch huts have long since rotted away. The low fence is gone. The gravel path is now covered by pavement. Your physical presence has been erased, but your ghost lingers. It lingers in the archives, in the faded photographs, and the brittle newspaper clippings. It lingers in the unsettling questions that these artifacts raise. It forces us to look again at our celebrated monuments of progress and ask what and who was sacrificed to build them. It reminds us that history is not just a story of triumphs and inventions, but also a story of exploitation and the quiet, stubborn resilience of the human spirit. You were not a savage. You were a man, a father, a husband, a hunter, a negotiator, a survivor. You were caught in the gears of a historical machine far bigger than yourself, a machine that tried to grind you down into a simple, profitable caricature. But it never fully succeeded. In your quiet acts of resistance, in your gallows humor, in your fierce, private loyalty to your family and your identity, you held on to a piece of yourself that they could never touch, never measure, and never truly own. You were the exhibit that stared back. And in your gaze, if we look closely enough, we can see the reflection of a world that is not as far removed from our own as we might like to think. We still put people in boxes. We still consume curated versions of other cultures. And we still struggle to see the complex human being behind the simple, convenient label. Your story is not a dusty relic of the Victorian age. It's a cautionary tale for the present. As our journey through the story of the human zoos concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry, woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. This is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Our next story is the Victorian geologist who found deep time and broke the Bible. Hope you like it. There's a certain comfort in having a tidy, well-organized universe. For centuries, the Western world had just that. The story of our planet was a simple, elegant affair with a clear beginning, a dramatic middle, and a known author. The Earth, according to the most respected scholarship of the day, was created on the evening preceding Sunday, October 23, 4004 BC. This wasn't some wild guess from a hermit in a cave. It was the result of meticulous, painstaking work by Archbishop James Ussher, a man who treated the lineages in the Old Testament with the same forensic intensity that a modern accountant reserves for a tax audit. His timeline was the accepted truth, printed in the margins of the King James Bible. It made the entirety of history a manageable, knowable thing, a story that was only about 6,000 years long. This cozy certainty had a place for everything. Noah's flood, for instance, was the perfect explanation for all of life's weird geological hiccups. A seashell fossil found on a mountaintop, obviously left there by the Great Deluge. Strange layers of rock stacked up like a geological tiramisu, clearly the result of chaotic waters churning up the land. It was a single, dramatic, all-purpose event that tidied up any confusing evidence the Earth might present. It was, to be frank, incredibly convenient. It meant that every rock, every fossil, every canyon was just a piece of scenery from a relatively recent blockbuster event. It was the action movie theory of geology, and everyone had a front row seat. The world was young, the story was simple, and God's word was the final word. It was all completely and utterly wrong. Tonight, you are a gentleman naturalist in the 1830s. You are a man of faith, a man of science, and a man who owns an excellent, if slightly mud-stained, tweed jacket. You live in a world lit by gaslight and powered by steam, a world of burgeoning industry and unshakable belief. The Bible is not just a holy book to you. It is a work of history, a scientific textbook, and a moral guide, all rolled into one. You believe in its account of creation as surely as you believe the sun will rise tomorrow. But you also have a secret passion, a quiet obsession that is leading you towards a terrifying and exhilarating precipice of doubt. Your passion is for rocks, and you are beginning to suspect they are telling a story far, far older and stranger than any you have ever read. Your proof, your undeniable receipt that shatters the 6,000-year-old story, isn't a grand fossil or a lost city. It's smaller, infinitely smaller. It is a single grain of sand. You hold a piece of dull, reddish sandstone in your hand, a rock you chiseled from a quarry wall in Scotland. You look at it through your magnifying glass, focusing on one tiny crystalline speck, and you understand, with a sudden gut-wrenching clarity, the journey the particle has taken. It was once part of a colossal mountain, granite forged in the planet's molten heart. Over unimaginable eons, wind and rain and ice ground it down, turning solid rock into dust. This single grain was washed into a stream, tumbled down a river, and carried out to an ancient sea, where it settled on the ocean floor. Over millions of more years, it was buried under the weight of countless other grains, the pressure squeezing and cementing it back into solid rock. And then, through a great geological upheaval, that seabed was thrust upwards, becoming dry land, only for the wind and rain to begin their work anew, exposing the layer of sandstone for you and your hammer to find. The biography of that one grain of sand is a story so long, it makes Archbishop Usher's entire timeline look like a long weekend. This discovery, part of a slow-burning revolution in the new science of geology, reveals something extraordinary about how we measure our world and our place in it. As we settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what geologists found, but what it tells us about the surprisingly relatable lives of people who lived in a time of radical change. Now dim the lights and prepare to discover why this story will change how you think about time itself. Your days begin not with a sermon, but with the satisfying heft of a geological hammer in your hand. You are a man of means, which is fortunate, because geologist isn't exactly a paying profession yet. It's a passion, a calling for gentlemen of a certain intellectual bent, men who find more divinity in a rock face than in a stained glass window. You spend your time in places most polite society avoids: muddy railway cuttings, echoing quarries, and windswept sea cliffs, where the land is actively surrendering to the sea. These are your cathedrals. The layers of rock, the strata, are your sacred texts. Your morning routine is a ritual of preparation. You pack a leather satchel with your tools, the hammer, a set of chisels, a compass for measuring the dip and strike of rock beds, a magnifying glass for close inspection, and your most important instrument, a notebook and a set of drawing pencils. In an era before photography, your ability to accurately sketch a rock formation is paramount. Your drawings are your data, the raw evidence you will later puzzle over by the fire in your study. You also pack a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and perhaps a small flask of something to ward off the perpetual damp chill of the British Isles. You pull on sturdy leather boots, already caked with the mud of a dozen different counties, and your faithful tweed jacket, its pockets bulging with odd-shaped stones and the occasional fossilized fern. You live in a world of quiet conviction. You are raised to believe that the earth is a finished product, a masterful creation made in 6 days. The story is known. Fossils of sea creatures on mountains, remnants of Noah's flood, great canyons and valleys, carved in a geologic instant by the receding waters. This framework, known as catastrophism, is comforting. It explains everything with a single dramatic, biblical event. It keeps your faith and your observations in tidy, separate boxes. You can be a man of God and a man of science without any messy contradictions. Or so you thought. The problem is, the more you look, the less sense it makes. You stand at the bottom of a deep quarry, the rhythmic chink of the workman's tools echoing around you. You place your hand on the cold, damp rock face. It's a wall of sandstone, hundreds of feet thick. It's made of countless individual layers or beds, each one barely thicker than a piece of paper. You can see the fine lines of lamination, the subtle changes in color and texture. According to the flood theory, this entire cliff face should have been deposited in a chaotic, watery slurry over the course of a few weeks or months. But what you see is order. You see delicate, fossilized ripple marks, identical to the ones you saw just yesterday on a sandy beach at low tide. You see tracks left by some small, ancient creature, preserved with impossible delicacy. This wasn't chaos. This was slow. This was patient. This was the work of calm, shallow water, depositing sand grain by grain, year after year, century after century. You pull out your notebook and begin to sketch, your fingers growing numb in the cold. You are not just drawing a rock. You are documenting a contradiction. You measure the thickness of the formation. 300 feet. You do a rough, unsettling calculation in your head. If it took a year to deposit a single millimeter of sand, a generous estimate, how long would it take to create this cliff? The number you arrive at is dizzying. It's a number that doesn't fit into your 6,000-year-old world. It's an inconvenient, stubborn, mathematical fact. You close your notebook, a profound sense of unease settling over you. You came here seeking evidence of God's grand design, and you found it. But the design is proving to be grander and older than you were ever taught to believe. The boxes in your mind are starting to break, and you can't help but wonder what else you're going to find as you dig deeper. Your social life, like your fieldwork, revolves around rocks. You are a member of the local philosophical and literary society, a collection of doctors, vicars, landowners, and industrialists who gather once a month to discuss the latest discoveries in science and nature. The air in the meeting room is thick with the smell of coal smoke, leather-bound books, and damp wool coats. Tonight's speaker is a fellow naturalist, a man with a wild beard and an even wilder theory about the fossilized bones of some enormous reptile recently unearthed in Dorset. He calls it an ichthyosaur, a fish lizard, and suggests it lived in an age before man. This, in itself, is a radical idea. The prevailing wisdom is that all creatures were created at the same time. The notion of extinction is a troubling one. It suggests God's creation was somehow imperfect, that he made creatures that couldn't survive. Even more troubling is the idea of a world that existed long before humans. The Bible is clear. The world was made for man. To suggest otherwise feels, well, a little blasphemous. Yet the evidence is there, in the cold stone bones of a creature unlike anything alive today. After the lecture, you and your colleagues gather around the fireplace, sipping sherry and engaging in spirited debate. The catastrophists, the old guard, are led by the local vicar, a kindly but firm man who argues passionately that the flood explains everything. He quotes scripture and points to the chaotic jumble of fossils in certain rock beds as proof of a violent, watery cataclysm. He speaks of God's power and the folly of questioning his revealed word. You listen respectfully. You have made these arguments yourself, but you find yourself drawn to a quieter group in the corner. Here, the conversation is different. It's about processes. It's about observing the world as it is today and using that knowledge to understand the past. An older gentleman, a Scottish doctor named Hutton, had published some radical ideas a few decades prior. He argued that the same slow, gradual forces you see at work every day, erosion, sedimentation, volcanic uplift, are responsible for shaping the entire planet. The present is the key to the past, was his mantra. His theory was called uniformitarianism. It was not a very catchy name, and it didn't have the dramatic flair of a global flood, but it had one thing going for it. It seemed to match what you were seeing with your own eyes. You chime in, describing the sandstone quarry, the delicate ripple marks, the impossible thickness of the beds. A few men nod in agreement. They have seen similar things. A canal engineer talks about the perfectly ordered layers of shale and coal he's been digging through, each scene telling a story of an ancient swamp that lived and died over vast stretches of time. A landowner describes a river on his property that is slowly, imperceptibly, cutting its way through a bed of limestone, carrying away a tiny amount of rock each year. The vicar overhears your conversation and joins the circle, his expression one of gentle concern. "But my good man," he says, directing his question to you, "if these processes are so slow, then the world must be of an antiquity that is simply unthinkable. It would contradict the very timeline given to us." There it is, the heart of the matter. The conflict isn't just about rocks, it's about time itself. The scale of time that uniformitarianism demands is terrifying. It's not a human scale. It's not a biblical scale. It's a vast, empty, almost meaningless expanse of years that the human mind can barely comprehend. To accept it feels like letting go of a handrail in the dark. It challenges not just the age of the earth, but humanity's place at the center of its story. You don't have an answer for the vicar. Not yet. You simply nod and say, "The evidence is puzzling, to be sure." But as you walk home through the foggy, gaslit streets, the question echoes in your mind. What if the unthinkable is true? What if the story of the earth is not a short story, but an epic novel, and you've only just read the first page? The comfort of certainty is slipping away, replaced by the thrilling, terrifying vertigo of a truly deep past. And you know, with a certainty that chills you more than the night air, that you cannot stop looking for the next chapter. The conflict isn't just in the debating halls of the Royal Society or your local philosophical club. It's in your own mind, a daily battle between faith and observation. You are a man of your time, and your time is one of profound, unshakable piety. You attend church every Sunday. You listen to the vicar's sermons. You sing the hymns. You bow your head in prayer. You believe in a creator, a divine intelligence that set the universe in motion. The beauty and complexity you see in nature, the perfect spiral of a fossilized ammonite, the intricate vascular system of a petrified leaf, all seem to you to be clear evidence of his handiwork. But then, on Monday morning, you are back at the cliff face, hammer in hand, and the rocks tell a different tale. Or rather, they tell the same tale, but in a different language. The language of the rocks is one of slow, relentless, indifferent processes. It speaks of mountains rising and falling like slow-motion breaths. It speaks of oceans advancing and retreating, leaving their mark in layers of chalk and shale. It speaks of life forms appearing, flourishing for millions of years, and then vanishing forever, replaced by others. This story has no protagonist. It has no moral. It is simply a chronicle of physical laws playing out over a canvas of time so vast it dwarfs human comprehension. One afternoon, you find something remarkable. You are exploring a stretch of coastline where recent storms have caused a landslide, exposing a fresh rock face. You see a clear, sharp line in the cliff. Below the line is a set of tilted, contorted layers of greywacke, a type of sandstone. The layers are almost vertical, as if they were once flat and have been pushed up by some immense force. But sitting directly on top of the eroded edges of these vertical layers is a perfectly horizontal bed of red sandstone. It's what you and your colleagues are beginning to call an unconformity. You sit on the cold beach and sketch it for hours, trying to piece together the story it tells. First, the greywacke sediments had to be laid down horizontally at the bottom of an ancient sea. That alone would have taken millions of years. Then, some colossal tectonic force must have squeezed and tilted those layers, lifting them up out of the water to form mountains. Next, over more untold millions of years, wind and rain had to erode those mountains completely, grinding them down to a flat plain. After that, the land must have subsided again, sinking beneath another, later sea, where the red sandstone could be deposited, grain by grain, on top of the old eroded mountain roots. Finally, the whole assemblage had to be lifted up once more to form the cliff you are looking at today. It's a story with at least 5 acts, and each act is an eternity long. Looking at this single rock face is like looking at the ruins of two separate worlds, one built on top of the other. The time gap between the formation of the lower rocks and the upper rocks, the unconformity, is an abyss. It's a chasm in time, representing a period of history so long that it is recorded only by its absence. Noah's flood, a single year-long event, could not possibly account for this. It would be like trying to explain the existence of the Roman Colosseum by saying a child built it yesterday with a bucket and spade. The scale is wrong. The process is wrong. Everything is wrong. You pack up your tools as the sun begins to set, the sky turning a bruised purple over the cold, gray sea. You feel a strange mix of emotions. There is the exhilaration of discovery, the intellectual thrill of solving a complex puzzle. But there is also a profound sense of melancholy. The 6,000-year-old world felt like a cozy, well-lit room. This new, ancient world feels like a vast, dark, and empty cavern, and you are holding a single, flickering candle. You have a choice. You can blow out the candle, go back to the comfort of the old story, and ignore the evidence of your own eyes. Or you can take a deep breath and step forward into the darkness, using your tiny light to map the terrifying, magnificent contours of this new reality. The challenge is immense, a chasm of its own, and you are not yet sure which side of it you will land on. The turning point does not come with a flash of lightning or a divine revelation. It arrives in the mail. It is a book, a thick, dense, 3-volume work by a colleague named Charles Lyell, titled * Principles of Geology *. The subtitle is what truly grabs you. * being an attempt to explain the former changes of the Earth's surface by reference to causes now in operation *. It's Hutton's old idea of uniformitarianism, but presented with a relentless, overwhelming barrage of evidence gathered from across Europe. You spend your evenings in your study, a glass of port at your elbow, the fire crackling in the hearth, utterly consumed by Lyell's arguments. He is a lawyer by training, and he prosecutes his case against catastrophism with methodical, irrefutable logic. He walks you through the slow work of rivers, the pace of coastal erosion, the barely perceptible rise and fall of landmasses. He provides calculations. He shows how Mount Etna in Sicily must have been built up, layer by slow layer of lava, over hundreds of thousands of years. He describes temple ruins in Italy that were clearly submerged by the sea and then raised again, demonstrating that the land itself is not static. Lyell's book is more than a collection of facts. It's a new way of seeing the world. He gives you the intellectual framework and the courage to trust your own observations. He gives this new, vast chronology a name, deep time. The phrase resonates with you. It perfectly captures the sense of scale, the almost spiritual awe that the geological record inspires. It's a time so deep, it makes the entirety of recorded human history seem like the thinnest imaginable film of frost on a window pane. Armed with this new perspective, you return to your fieldwork with renewed vigor. You are no longer just a collector of curiosities. You are a historian of the earth, reading its autobiography. You begin to collaborate more formally with your like-minded colleagues. You map the strata of your region, tracing layers of a particular type of rock for miles across the countryside. You realize that the order of the layers is consistent. A certain type of limestone is always found above a specific shale, which is always found above a particular sandstone. You are, quite literally, discovering the order of creation. And in those layers, there are fossils. You begin to understand that fossils are not just randomly distributed. Specific types of fossils are found only in specific layers. The trilobites, those strange, armored, woodlouse-like creatures, are always in the older, lower rocks. The ammonites appear later, higher up in the sequence. And the great reptile bones are found in even younger strata. It's a ladder of life, a story of succession. One set of creatures dominates the world for an epoch, and vanishes, to be replaced by another. The implications are staggering. Not only is the Earth ancient, but life itself has a history, a long and complex story of change, of appearance and disappearance. This is, in many ways, even more radical than the idea of an old Earth. The biblical account is one of static creation. God made the animals, and here they are. But the rocks are showing you a dynamic, ever-changing pageant of life. It's as if creation wasn't a single event, but an ongoing process. This doesn't necessarily disprove the existence of a creator for you. In fact, for a while, it deepens your sense of wonder. Perhaps this is how God worked, through natural laws, unfolding his plan over eons rather than days. It's a way to reconcile your faith with the evidence, to build a bridge between the rock and the word. But the bridge is fragile, because the deeper you look, the more questions arise. If life has changed so much, what does that mean for humanity? Are we, too, just a chapter in this long book? The fossils you find are all of strange, alien creatures. There are no human bones, no artifacts in these ancient rocks. It seems humanity is a very, very recent arrival on the scene. You have dismantled the old timeline. You have shattered the notion of a young Earth. Now, you stand before an even more profound mystery, the history of life itself. The ground beneath your feet has shifted, and you are beginning to realize that the entire story of who we are and where we come from is about to be rewritten. And you are holding the pen. The moment of true, unshakable conviction happens on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. There is no storm, no dramatic discovery of a monster skull. There is only you in your study, with a simple piece of old red sandstone you collected years ago from the coast of Scotland. It's a rock you've handled 100 times, a familiar paperweight on your cluttered desk. But today, you look at it through the lens of Lyell's logic and your own hard-won experience. You pick it up. It feels solid, permanent, the very definition of inanimate. But you know that is an illusion. You take your magnifying glass and examine its surface. It's not a uniform mass. It's a compressed collection of individuals. Millions upon millions of tiny grains of sand, each with its own history. You focus on one, a minuscule fleck of quartz glinting in the lamplight, and you let yourself truly follow the story of that single grain. You picture the mountain it came from, a jagged peak of granite somewhere in the north, long before Scotland existed as a nation, long before humans existed as a species. A mountain range as grand as the Himalayas, now ground down to nothing. You imagine the relentless power of ice, cracking the granite, and the patient work of water, carrying this tiny speck on a journey of 1,000 miles. You see it tumbling in a rushing, primordial river, its sharp edges worn smooth against other grains, a process of slow, geological socialization. You imagine the vast, shallow sea where the river met its end. You see your grain of sand settling gently onto the seabed, joining a layer of its brethren. Then another layer covers it, and another. The centuries pass, the millennia pass. The weight above becomes immense. The pressure is unimaginable. The water between the grains is squeezed out, and minerals crystallize, cementing the loose sand into solid rock. You are no longer imagining a process. You are feeling the weight of deep time. Then the story shifts. The seabed begins to rise. A force of continental scale, moving at the speed of a growing fingernail, lifts this rock, this future piece of Scotland, out of the water. The sea drains away. It becomes dry land, and the process of erosion begins all over again. For millions more years, wind and rain lash at the new land, stripping away the layers above your grain of sand, until finally, the bed of sandstone it belongs to is exposed to the air on a windswept cliff. And there it waits for millennia more, until you, a curious ape wrapped in tweed, come along with a hammer and chisel it free. You put down the magnifying glass. The sandstone in your hand no longer feels like a simple rock. It feels like a book, an epic. The story you just traced, The biography of that single grain of sand is a narrative that requires millions, perhaps hundreds of millions, of years to unfold. It's an undeniable physical truth you are holding in your hand. The 6,000-year timeline of Archbishop Usher isn't just wrong. It's a profound, almost comical misunderstanding of the scale of reality. It's like trying to measure the distance to the sun with a 12-inch ruler. In this moment, the internal conflict you have wrestled with for so long doesn't so much resolve as it evaporates. It's no longer a question of faith versus science. The evidence is simply too overwhelming. The world is old, unimaginably old. To deny it is to deny gravity, to deny the evidence of your own senses. This realization is not a loss of faith in God, but a loss of faith in a particular, human-centric, and overly literal interpretation of Scripture. The Bible, you conclude, is not a textbook of geology. It is a book about humanity's relationship with the divine. Its truth is moral and spiritual, not scientific. You have not lost your God. You have just discovered that His workshop is infinitely larger, and His schedule infinitely more patient than you ever conceived. A sense of peace settles over you. The vertigo is gone, replaced by a profound sense of humility and awe. You are a tiny creature, living a fleeting existence on a very old planet. But you have been given a mind capable of comprehending, at least in part, its immense and beautiful history. You look around your study, at the shelves of fossils, the stacks of notebooks filled with sketches, the geological maps covering the walls. This is not the work of a heretic. This is an act of worship. It is an attempt to read the first and greatest of all sacred texts, the earth itself. The years that follow are a whirlwind of discovery, a golden age for your new science. The idea of deep time, once a radical heresy, gradually becomes the accepted foundation of geology. It unlocks everything. It provides the necessary canvas for other revolutionary ideas that are just beginning to percolate. A young naturalist named Charles Darwin is about to take a voyage on the HMS Beagle, a journey that will lead him to another, even more controversial theory about the history of life. His theory of evolution by natural selection will require the vast timescales that you and your fellow geologists have just proven to exist. You have, without knowing it, laid the foundational groundwork for the greatest revolution in the history of human thought. Your life continues. You grow older. Your tweed jacket becomes more frayed. Your back aches a little more after a long day in the field, but you never lose the thrill of it. You continue to map, to draw, to collect, to debate. You watch as a new generation of geologists takes your work and builds upon it, using microscopes to study the crystalline structure of rocks, using chemistry to analyze their composition. They begin to assign names to these vast periods of time you helped uncover. Cambrian, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous. It's a new calendar for the world, with epochs and eras instead of days and weeks. You don't entirely abandon your faith. You simply learn to hold it differently. Your God is no longer a micromanager who tinkered the world into existence over a long weekend. He is an architect of sublime patience, a being who works through natural law and deep time. Your sense of wonder is not diminished. It is magnified 1,000-fold. The world is so much more strange, more beautiful, and more ancient than your ancestors ever dreamed. You often return to that simple piece of old red sandstone on your desk. You pick it up and feel its weight, the compressed history in its grains. It is your touchstone, your reminder of the journey you have taken. You went out looking for evidence of a 6,000-year-old story, and in the process, you stumbled upon the epic of the Earth. You showed that our planet has a history, a deep and complex autobiography written in the language of stone. This new understanding does not make the world less sacred. It makes it more so. It means that every landscape you see is a historical document. The rolling hills, the river valley, the sea cliff, they are all monuments, not to a single act of creation, but to an eternity of slow, patient, and majestic change. You have learned to see the world not just as a place, but as a process. And you have discovered that the most profound truths are not always found in the pages of an ancient book, but sometimes they are waiting to be discovered, locked away inside a single, silent, unassuming grain of sand. You realize, in the quiet twilight of your life, that you have not disproven a miracle. You have simply uncovered a much, much bigger one. As our journey through the discovery of deep time concludes tonight, we're reminded that the past is far from dusty and dull. It's a vibrant, often surprising, and always intriguing tapestry, woven with human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional ancient mystery that still makes us wonder. This is the Sleeping Archaeologist, encouraging you to remain curious about the incredible tales still waiting to be discovered beneath our feet. Good night.